Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Realities podcast. As markets are crashing all over the world, we're here to talk about energy.
Hey, but oil's holding steady. We got to
oil's
hold it.
holding steady in the low 70s. Yeah, I mean, after a 15% collapse over the past 2 weeks in oil prices, we'll see how steady it remains today. But here with me today, I'm David Blackmon, of course, your unprepared narrator today. And here with me are Dr. Tammy Nemeth, who is in the UK, correct?
UK today. Yeah.
Hopefully staying out of the looming civil war that's developing over there. And Irina Slav in Bulgaria. How are you today?
Great. Thank you, David.
No riots today in Bulgaria yet?
No.
Good.
Plus a big backwater.
Okay. And up in Oklahoma, we have Mr. Stu Turley, the CEO of the Sandstone Group. How are you today, Stu?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I don't have to worry about a riot up here except for the squirrels and bears.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of in the same boat here in Texas. We're not having riots yet, but if the Dow goes down another 3,000 or 4,000 points, all bets are off. But today we are here to talk about deindustrialization and the consequences it has on the societies, mainly in the Western world, who are experiencing it today. We've had stories. I mean, I just went out and got a few links to some stories here, some headlines that I read over the weekend. More German companies mull relocation due to high energy prices. That was at Reuters. It's all over. Tata Steel to end steel making in Britain by September. So there's the deindustrialization of Britain that's been ongoing for a while. At my own Substack, we had Hertz EV fire sale failure shows its net zero bloodbath is just getting started. That's the first time I've used the terms fire sale and bloodbath in a single headline on any story. And then finally, there's a story about Vineyard Wind. Federal regulators issue revised suspension order for Vineyard Wind as more debris falls from the damaged turbine. This, of course, is America's only active offshore wind boondoggle, with several more under development. And so here we go with our glorious energy transition progressing exactly as we should have expected it to progress, correct? Anybody disagree with that? I mean, I think we've all been expecting this day for quite a while now. I don't know. Tammy, what are you seeing in the way of deindustrialization in the UK or your second home in Canada?
That's a good question. I think the interesting part about the Tata Steel article is that they're closing the blast furnace, but they're looking for government money to have an electric furnace. So the blast furnace would be powered by coal or natural gas or whatever. And they're saying, well, we'll keep some jobs and we'll keep it open if the government helps pay for the electric arc furnace. So that's part of their sustainability transition. I don't know when that'll be finished. It's one of these things like the Germans saying, well, we're mulling. They've been mulling for some time to move their operations overseas. And usually when they're saying they're mulling, that means they're talking to government to find some means of subsidy to stay open and keep jobs and that sort of thing. And one of the interesting aspects with the forced transition to alternative vehicles like EVs or whatever, for example, in Canada, there were all these battery manufacturers. There's Lion Electric, which has operations in both Illinois and in Quebec in Canada, and they build electric school buses. And there was an article this week that they've had to lay off another third of their employees. They got like tens of millions of dollars from both levels of government, provincial and federal in Canada. And apparently they're going to give the money back, but I don't see how. And because they were paid to keep the employees going. So they're tooling back. And so when you talk about deindustrialization, it's also this idea that they will have alternative means of employment and manufacturing, but in green jobs. but then these green jobs, they get all this money for them and then they disappear,
Right.
which is par for the course in every country, it seems, that tries to jump on this bandwagon. And in the UK, I mean, it's complicated to some extent. Now we've got GB Energy, which is one of the headlines I'm going to talk about later, but it's all about shifting all that investment and subsidy money to supposedly keep green jobs. But in a conversation I had this morning with someone, there's a huge solar array being built on farmland, and it'll be built by Germans in the UK. So, yay, green jobs, just not for British, I guess. I don't know.
I suppose you should count yourself lucky that it's not being built by Chinese companies.
Yeah, which was an interesting story from IER a couple days ago, the Institute for Energy Research, where they were talking about the number of Chinese solar manufacturers in America.
Yeah.
So
It's
The
quite a deal.
Inflation Reduction Act has ruined our country.
Yep. It's well on the way to
as it
doing
was
so.
intended.
Irina,
Oh,
you had a
shit.
wonderful story about EV batteries this morning at your Substack. I have to
Thank
tell
you.
you, I finished reading
Yeah,
it
that was
about 30
awesome.
minutes.
Thanks.
It's
Yeah.
just something everyone needs to go out to Substack and do a search on Irina Slav at Substack, and it's just a glorious story. Anyway, Irina, what are you seeing as the consequences of deindustrialization of the West?
Right now, I'm trying to process the fact that somebody is building solar in Britain, which is not the best location for solar,
I know.
and they're building it on farmland. They're not going to just stop with Britain, but it's symptomatic of the utter cluelessness of the people leading this, or I don't know, evil nature, depending on what your preferred explanation is of this, but we're seeing, and we have been talking about it, as you said, David, we have been talking about it since there is an Energy Reality podcast.
Yeah.
When we started with Armando, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago?
2.5 years ago.
And we weren't the only ones. There are plenty of people who have been warning that this will be the consequence of this energy transition push, because it could not work. It couldn't work because of physical laws, the laws of physics, literal constraints and limits to what wind and solar can do. They cannot replace hydrocarbon energy. We are seeing it in Germany, and yet I love how the media told us that Germany surprisingly slipped into a recession in the second quarter. Really?
Shocking.
Shocking. Nobody could have seen this coming. The exodus of German companies from Germany to survive is just stunning. And the government can't do much about it because they have no money.
Right.
They started, like I think I wrote about this a few months ago. I can't remember when it was, but they rolled back their subsidies, their EV subsidies, because they couldn't keep them going. And even with subsidies, I read an article today from Eurostat, statistical data, that EVs, if we're talking about just EVs, are like a minute percentage of all cars, even in the European Union.
Yeah.
And if Denmark has the highest percentage of EV cars of the total, Germany doesn't, what are we talking about? The UK fell out of the top manufacturing countries in the world. That's entirely because of the last few governments' energy policies. So we have a growing number of examples. We have Germany, we have the UK, we have Canada, we have the US. The evidence is, it's piling up. And yet they keep going in the same direction. They wouldn't be satisfied until it all breaks down. And then they wonder what happened. It wasn't meant to happen this way.
Right. And it'll all be blamed on not spending quite enough, right? And so
Right.
they'll go
We're not-
for another round.
Yeah,
of
and
spending.
on China, because China dominates the raw material and the whole supply chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should have thought about that earlier before trying to start from scratch when you're catching up on, 20 or more years of development by China of this supply chain, they just
all of which
walk
has been subsidized by those of us in the Western world, right? I mean, that Chinese development hasn't been organic. I mean, it's been heavily subsidized by corporations and governments in the West.
because it was easy to outsource all of this to China.
Yes. Yeah.
And now they're waking up to some realities. Wait.
And the reality is the pollution goals. We see that New Zealand airline is not going to meet their net zero goals. Net zero is not going to happen because of AI. But let me read you a little bit out of Robert Stack's Substack this week.
Robert Bryce,
thank you.
Yeah.
I did go to Oklahoma State University, so I'm brilliant. Over the last 3 years, China has been adding roughly 1 Germany each year in terms of electricity demand, and this trend is expected to continue. Listen to this. China dominates the global market for coal a much greater degree than any other fuel, accounting for 58% of demand. Unbelievable. India just announced that they are signing up, or they have now approved 10 more coal plants. Mines, not even the power plants, just mines. So they are going all in, and I'm happy for them. More power to the people is the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, China makes the argument that with the new technology of the newer coal plants, there's a way to have the particulate emissions down, put scrubbers in, and all that kind of thing. And they assure everybody that's what they're doing. I hope India is doing the same thing. Otherwise, then it creates all other kinds of issues. But as we've said before on the podcast, coal makes a lot of sense for strategic reasons as well as reliability regions. I mean, you can stockpile it. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. If you have a pile, you use it up. If you have your own mines, like, for example, the one coal power plant that they're really trying to shut down in Canada, which is in Saskatchewan, is built right beside a coal mine. So, obviously it's easier if you have the mine right there and then you have a power plant right there. It makes it much more reliable and affordable. Much lower cost than if you're having to import LNG or whatever, uranium or whatever else from everywhere else. So from a security point, it makes a lot of sense.
It totally does. And it's why I think within 5 years, we're going to be building new coal plants in the United States again, because we're destroying our energy security right now. And we're going to have to find a way to come back quickly from that. And the quickest way to do that will be to build more coal plants.
All of the above, like China.
Well, we could reopen the old ones to the extent they have modern equipment on them, scrubber equipment, which, advances all the time, just as it does in the oil and gas industry. And it'll be an economic decision whether you reopen mothballed plants that you haven't already destroyed, which some of the plants we've mothballed in the United States are just being taken down completely, or you build a new one. And it may be cheaper in many instances to build new ones. Joseph McLennan has a great comment here.
Yeah, I love this.
My cattle and chickens are doing great. I'm glad to hear that, Joseph. Just don't sign a lease with a solar or wind company and you'll be fine. That's reality, right? Well, I'm sorry, Irina, I interrupted you there.
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh, okay. Well, we have in the United States another story I wanted to talk about here. We talked about companies going back on their net zero goals, and of course, Hertz has done that. They've gone back on their promise to have 25% of their fleet all electric by the end of this year, and in fact, they've been trying to fire sale a big portion of their existing fleet at way below market prices for used electric vehicles, and they can't sell them, right? So they're having the same problem as legacy car makers are and Tesla dealers are in selling used electric vehicles on the open market. This is possibly a potentially fatal flaw, I think, for the electric vehicle industry. Nobody wants to buy used electric vehicles for very good reasons. And a lot of the reasons, again, in Irina's piece this morning on batteries, she details there is the unreliability and the high cost of replacing the batteries. And I just don't know. I mean, do you see any of these alternatives that we are being forced to adopt in the Western world being truly viable in the long run? I mean, the subsidies are about to run out. If we're going into a global recession now, which it looks like we are, the subsidies are going to have to go away because otherwise your country is going to become bankrupt. And I mean, I think that's an alternative that's too destructive to contemplate, even for the idiots running our governments today. But I wonder what y'all think. Are any of these industries in any danger of becoming truly viable without the subsidies?
Of course not. They've proven that they cannot be viable without the subsidies. And the latest piece of evidence was in the UK when the government agreed to increase the money, the minimum guaranteed price for offshore wind by 50%, just like that.
Yeah.
What's another $500 million between friends?
Yeah.
You know, and the only reason it had to do that is because offshore wind or any wind really is completely and utterly unviable on its own. It cannot turn in a profit on its own, hence the minimum guaranteed prices. But you pose a very good question, David, about a global recession. What happens when we all slip into a recession? And you know what I'm afraid of? That those idiots in government will try to double down on their so-called green agenda.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they won't stop before they really run out of all money or before they get ousted in a forceful way.
New York is a perfect example of that. The Manhattan Contrarian put out over the weekend an excellent article. The great green economy is failing as costs hammer consumers and businesses. But one of the great lines in here is New York expected to ramp up renewable energy production in the years, but is unlikely to meet any climate goals.
Yeah.
They're just killing their economy in New York and destroying the grid.
Yeah.
And they're
And
failing
to Irina's point, doubling down on failure and disaster is the model these left-wing politicians follow. They never admit they're wrong about anything. Their response is always to double down on failure, and until they're thrown out of office. So, you know, we see Great Britain now having just elected a new government, already with riots all over the country in revolt to the new government's policies, and yet, you know, they don't really have to hold another election for 5 years, right?
5 years of this. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They might have
Well, I
to.
mean, the people aren't revolting against all the policies. It's the immigration issue, right? And the thousands of people who arrive on the shores in dinghies, a lot of it, you know, pushed forward by authorities in Europe, you know, who are waiting for the new government to be elected before they sent the boats over. And they're being put up in hotels at cost to taxpayers, and puts a lot of strain on housing, like we're seeing in every Western country. So, you know, the solution then is to keep bringing people in and then force house building on agricultural land, on green space. So for a government that claims to be so environmental, it wants to take up the green space of existing communities and fill it with really, you know, packed in condensed housing. So I don't know how that's
guarantee the jobs of these people. Sorry for interrupting you.
Well, exactly. I mean, what jobs? Because they end up being on benefits forever. They don't necessarily like the one guy, this Egyptian guy was found guilty of robbing someone of a $25,000 watch in London somewhere. I can't believe a watch is that much, but anyway, wasn't put in jail and not given community service or anything because he didn't speak English. Let him go.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's nice.
And this is one of
Wow.
the reasons why people are upset, because one of the first moves the new government did was release 6,000 prisoners from jail, saying, they don't need to be there anymore. We're just going to let them go. It's like, well, okay, how do we know that a lot of the unrest, the violence that is happening, isn't being generated by some of these people who were let out? We don't know. I mean, part of it is you can see their people are in masks and they're doing stuff and whatever. So I don't doubt that. Like, I think Stu has a clip here where it is part of the people who are protesting encounter the police and there's an issue. And yesterday they were trying to attack a hotel where these illegal migrants are staying. And, these people are clearly upset, but there's been other violence that it's unclear if it's those actual protesters who are doing the violence. Maybe it's some of these 6,000 people who were let out. I don't know.
And we are about to see it in the United States. I'm going to go on record right now to say, buckle up. It is about to hit the United States. Now, make sure if you go out and protest that you know who you're protesting with and for. Let me show you this one clip.
It's the UK.
Here we are. Watch the guy on the right. Boom! In the chest, in the head. He gets it in the head, and then right in the eye. Oh my goodness! Now, if you're gonna riot, make sure you know who. Ask your people that you're rioting with, do you know how to throw a rock?
It's not funny. It's not funny at all.
No, it's not.
It
funny.
didn't hurt a bit. I mean, holy smokes! No, and on a serious note, I think it's going to get ugly in the United States. I've got some contacts that I've been talking to, and if you're in a big city, get out.
Well, we've been saying that for 4 years.
Yeah.
And whether there will be unrest in the United States depends entirely on whether or not it will benefit the Democratic Party. If it does, then we'll have riots. If it doesn't, we won't.
Antifa just announced this weekend that they are fired up, they're well armed, and they're coming.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, Antifa is a subsidiary of the Democratic Party in the United States. So, anyway, sorry, that'll piss some people off, I guess. I don't care.
Don't either. Now,
if we worried about that, we wouldn't be having this podcast.
I have this funny little thing. So we were talking about the wind turbines and how they were, with my family, we were talking about how the birds get slaughtered by the wind turbines. And my daughter said, well, isn't that BLM? Bird Lives Matter?
No way.
Well done.
It's like, can we protest and have BLM signs? Bird Lives Matter.
It's really good. I wouldn't even
like
thought
that.
of that. Yeah.
We needed that. That's almost t-shirt worthy. Having an eagle all gimped up like this, is on a t-shirt.
Matter.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that aren't funny. Yeah.
Really, really sad, because the other day we took our daughter to an animal shelter, the only one in Bulgaria that takes in wild birds that have suffered some injury or other. Thankfully, we don't have that many wind turbines, but I was thinking when I saw this hawk, a small hawk with an amputated wing due to some injury, do we really need more injured birds by building more wind turbines?
I know, and in Germany, they're putting them in forests. They're putting the turbines in forests.
Wherever they put them, we have birds that fly high.
The Biden-Harris group is planning on putting in wind turbines in the Gulf of Mexico, right in the middle of the biggest migratory bird path in the world.
16 billion birds a year. 16 billion birds a year fly that route over the Gulf of Mexico, and they're going to put these big wind farms right in the middle of it.
Then they'll say that the bird population is decreasing. It's climate change.
It's climate change.
It's climate change. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, didn't they do an environmental assessment?
Sure, they do. Yeah, but I mean,
And
Sure.
it was no trouble that it's on the migratory path.
I
But
mean, it's just the same as the governing agency and the Biden administration saying the wind turbines off the Northeast aren't killing whales.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know. I'm asking
regulators,
citizens. I know it's
Yeah.
just so frustrating when we're talking about actual nature and how this transition is devastating it.
it is.
You got to kill nature to save nature.
Basically,
Boy, that's
like
good.
it's the same with people. We're all gonna die if we don't solve the climate change
Nectar
problem.
discharged a nasty-looking
But let's
substance
kill a
into
few billion
Narragansett
people
Bay.
to solve it.
Initially described as oil, the Rhode Island
this is one I just want to. I'll turn the volume off. But we showed this last week, and it is a good enough video that when you take a look at it, the amount of oil and chemicals that are on these silly things. Let me freeze this right here. It is 34 million gallons of coolant just in this one wind farm that is out there ready to be thrown into the it's despicable how bad these things are.
And that's a mixture of chemicals because when crude oil leaks or spills, they have developed technologies to collect it
Yep.
in its entirety. But we don't have these technologies for these mixtures of chemicals and oil,
Nope.
I suppose. Keep it
So-
wild.
Anyway, boy, I'm getting depressed here. Maybe we should go to headlines.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yes, let's go to headlines.
Yeah, let's have some fun.
Let's see who's on deck first here.
Oh,
It will
Why,
be
it's
the
fine.
great Tammy.
Okay, so I'll go to the second one first. The headline is from Pipeline Online. TC Energy signs a deal to sell minority stake in a natural gas pipeline to indigenous groups. And so this is one of the major natural gas pipelines in Canada, and a group of indigenous people, I think from Alberta, have now bought a minority stake in the pipeline. And there's some talk that the recently completed Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is owned by the government, and they're looking to divest their ownership. The Canadian federal government owns the pipeline, and they're looking to divest it or sell it off to different indigenous groups. And what's interesting is that there's a split within the indigenous communities in Canada because the majority of the First Nations want energy infrastructure. They want development on their lands and to be able to generate revenue. And then there's a small minority who are against it. And it's this conflict that has created a lot of issues in Canada with respect to construction of pipelines, construction of LNG terminals, and increased expansion and development. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this sale and potentially with the oil pipeline sale. And what's interesting, because I think one of the reasons why we had this deindustrialization theme today was because Chevron is moving out of California to Texas, just like SpaceX and Tesla and everything else is moving to Texas away from California. And what's interesting is that the Trans Mountain Pipeline is exporting oil to California. So while California no longer is reducing its oil production, it's getting it from other places. Interestingly, they're getting a lot from Argentina, which has increased significantly over the past 6 months.
Yeah.
And
So
Tammy, they're still getting they are still getting 70% of the oil generated by Chinese companies out of the rainforest. Californians are hypocrites in destroying the rainforest.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, let's kill the environment to have a good life and whatever, right? And then the other story there is, what is Great British Energy and what does it mean for me? And this is from the UK government website. So one of the first initiatives the new Labour government in the United Kingdom did was to create a state company called Great British Energy. At first, and I knew they were going to do this during the campaign and whatever, they said, oh, it's just going to be an investment organization. And then when you read the details, they're actually going to be asset owners, and they're going to be a state energy company, but it's going to be renewables, and they're going to fund it by increasing the windfall taxes on existing oil and gas operations in the North
Oh
Sea.
my.
At the same time, they're saying there can be no more oil and gas development in the North Sea. So I don't know how they're going to continue funding this, since it's like squeezing the last drop of revenue from oil and gas companies in order to fund their death. I mean, it's
And
absurd. And
BP
This is
is
why I believe they're idiots rather than evil people, because they are skinning the oil industry in the North Sea alive instead of leasing it, and they expect it to survive.
yeah, I know. It's unfathomable, and you're right. It's idiocy and an absurdity to the nth level kind of thing. But one of the other things. Yeah. Why do they think this is going to? But this is it's like they're testing it, because this is what they want to roll out for every Western country. I don't see how they can do it in the United States, but they're definitely going to try it in Canada. They're doing it through different means, similar but different means.
Wow.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this template works. If it will work, I don't think it will. But yeah, so
it will work the same way it worked in Sri Lanka. And if they think it's going to be different just because Europe is, I'm sorry, more civilized, as the former chief of EU diplomacy said, not my words, the garden and the jungle around the garden, that was Europe. It's going to work out the same way.
Yeah.
It might take longer, but it will end the same way, because people are people.
Yes, thank you for mentioning Sri Lanka, because people kind of put that in the memory hole.
Right.
No one wants to talk about their little experiment. So it's like, if you want to see what happens in an energy transition, if you do it quickly, and it doesn't matter even if it's not quickly, the outcome is the same, look at Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Or you can look at Germany. We don't have riots yet in Germany, but if the government keeps going in the same direction, the scenario will repeat.
I don't know. The German people seem to have become an amazingly complacent, sheepish bunch of people.
A lot of them are, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it's astonishing to me what they have put up with without major social unrest. And
they did protest last year. When was it? When the higher energy costs began to bite in. So that's reason to hope.
Yeah.
And the farmers.
The farmers are the hope of that nation.
Yeah.
Okay, my turn. The activists pushing companies to ditch their diversity policy. So apparently there's this guy who's a music video producer. It's totally nothing to do with diversity, inclusion, whatever. But he has taken to X to call on companies to stop being stupid and start hiring people on their merits and not their skin color or ethnic group or whatever.
What a concept.
And apparently these calls are gaining traction, and companies are pulling back their DEI programs and their sustainability programs, because people are getting unhappy with them. And I think this is absolutely great. And I forgot his name.
Robbie Starbuck.
Robbie Starbuck.
Yeah. He's doing a great job. I think he's just he's picked the right time when people are already beginning to be disgruntled about this whole equity and inclusiveness and diversity crap, because it's not working. You get a lot of incompetent people, and as he said, he's Cuban American, and as he said, I feel the same way. He doesn't want his children to be hired just because they're Latino, and I think the same way, which is why I hated female executive quotas in Germany when they implemented them years ago. I do not want to be hired because I'm a woman. I want to be hired because I'm good at what I do.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah,
should feel the
exactly.
same way, and I do not understand why they don't. Maybe because they're incompetent. Well, yeah. I mean, look at the press secretary of the White House. I'm sorry.
Thanks for bringing that painful memory up. Holy
I'm
smoke!
sorry. That's why I'm apologizing. It's painful for me, and I'm not American. And we have some great news from the CEO of Shell, who I thought was a smart man. I still think he's a smart man. I have no idea why. He says that Europe's energy crisis is over just because gas prices have temporarily fallen back to pre-22 levels. And I'd like to read this quote. The falling prices and volatility in Europe saw Shell's renewable and energy solutions business, which includes power trading, post 187 million loss.
Yeah.
A 215% drop from the quarter before. The oil major also said it had reduced its pipeline of renewable power projects under construction from 4.6 gigawatts in the first half of last year to 3.8 gigawatts. That must be because the gas crisis is over and they're going to make big money from trading gas instead of building renewables. I don't know.
I don't know.
This part was actually buried towards the end of the very, very long interview, very long article, sort of just mentioning it by the way. But this is important. Just because gas prices are back to levels from 3 years ago, doesn't mean they will stay there. First of all, it's summer. It's, the weakest demand period because Europeans are not as big on air conditioning, especially in France, as we see, as North Americans.
Yes.
I would like to ask Mr. Sawan how he would feel about gas prices come November. And yet they're cutting the so-called renewables portfolio.
Yeah, he's embarked on a pretty big project to cut their spending on renewables and refocus on their core business. And BP's
Which
done the
makes him a
same
smart
thing.
man. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So,
So I just
Irina,
wonder if that's just rhetoric he's using rather than anything he really believes.
yeah, I it's behind a paywall, so I haven't read the article yet. So, does he actually say the energy crisis is over, or is that just a headline they wanted to get attention with?
I can't quote literally. I don't have this kind of memory, but he did say that prices are back to pre-war levels. So this means the crisis is over. And there was no mention about price volatility.
Yeah.
The message
And plus a loss.
seems to be that, prices are back down to where they were 3 years ago. It's all good.
Doesn't
It's
seem
so
to be logical, does it?
I don't understand it because they're taking this huge loss on their renewables, and it almost sounds like he's saying we're taking this loss because the crisis is over. I don't know. That's weird.
Yeah.
It is really weird. Let me just see. We are moving back to normalized price and margin level that is pre-22. Normalizing prices. That's what he's talking about.
Right. Okay. Until there's
completely unrelated, they're shrinking their wind and solar portfolio.
Yeah.
Because the crisis is over. They don't need it, I guess. Right?
That doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound very, very green. If the build out of wind and solar is dependent on a gas price crisis.
Yeah. And I thought they're getting off gas anyway. So wouldn't they still need this wind? And so does the article give any explanation on why they're reducing those projects?
Because they're loss making. It's very simple. And their shareholders, I'm sure, are pressuring them to do what they're actually doing.
Yeah. And they had to wait until they got their headquarters moved out of The Hague to London before they could, make that shift in strategic vision because, the Dutch weren't going to allow it. Shell
in the
next
EU.
to move the headquarters? Well, maybe so.
Well, it's
They've been
about
making
time.
noise about it. Yeah.
Well, they already did, right? So they moved from The Hague
Right.
to London, and now they're talking maybe they'd move to America somewhere.
Yeah. The
But
MVP
is that
above, yeah.
again just another way to try and get more European laxity in applying the rules or something? I don't know.
I don't know.
VP
Yeah.
is also rumbling on that. It's who knows, they're all rumors, but if hey, there's lots of room in Texas. More of the merrier.
A lot of
Yeah.
empty office space in downtown Houston too.
Yes.
They could get a good deal.
Yep.
Are you
Perfect
done
timing.
there, Irina? That was good.
That was awesome.
That was all.
That was a good catch. All right, here we go. Chevron taking its headquarters to Texas. Yes, indeed, they are. That
I love that
announcement came
quote
Friday.
you found.
Yeah, that's Davy Crockett was a hero of the Texas Revolution who had been a U.S. senator in Tennessee. And when he was leaving Tennessee in early 1836, he told his political tormentors that you may all go to hell and I will go to Texas. And about 3 months later, he was dead, killed by Santa Anna's army at the Alamo. But it's a great quote. I don't think Chevron will suffer the same fate for moving to Texas from California.
No.
But they are moving their headquarters there. They've actually been kind of gradually doing that over the past 10 years or so. They only have 2,000 employees remaining in California and already had 7,000 at their headquarters in Houston. So this is just the last tranche of people moving, including the CEO and the rest of the executive team. And it's just it's a continuation, the consolidation of the oil industry down to Houston. Companies like to be in Houston because that's where all the deals are made. Exxon moved its headquarters from the Dallas-Fort Worth area to Houston last year, and it's kind of a fad. Everybody's doing it, and I wouldn't be surprised, as we talked about a few minutes ago, if Shell and or BP ended up doing the same thing, because as bad as things have gotten in the United States, it's still a friendlier regulatory environment, at least for now, than the UK is, and a friendlier tax environment, at least for now. And, of course, and that's one of the reasons why you moved to Texas from California, because we don't have a state income tax. And, these executives will save millions of dollars in taxes every year. So that's another kind of incentive we have in Texas for moving people here. And then there's the resource base, which Chevron is a huge producer in the Permian Basin. And so this gets the executive team a lot closer to that and to their big operations in the Gulf of Mexico. So kudos to Chevron. Welcome to Texas.
Why didn't they do it sooner? Sorry, David.
I don't know. I mean, and you can ask that of any of these companies that have moved from California to Texas, why it took them so long to get here. Kevin Killow, just as an aside, has a great article at justthenews.com about this and the companies that have moved to Texas from California. I mean, the number of Fortune 500 companies that have made that move over the last 5-6 years is pretty amazing. So everyone should go read that. In fact, I'm going to post a link to it on my Substack so folks can access it there. But I mean, there's a lot of Chevron's been in California since its inception in 1879, so it has a long history there. And it just becomes kind of hard to break those ties. Chevron also historically, decades ago, the preponderance of its production domestically was in California, and several refineries. Still has 2 refineries left there. Yeah. And so that state had been a big focus of the company's business until, the last 20 years or so, when California has really become a really heavy-handed Soviet-style regulatory system that they've implemented over there. And so I guess, they just finally decided they'd had enough, and kind of like Elon Musk did with Tesla first, and now he's going to move SpaceX and Twitter headquarters down to Austin. And so, it's just kind of the sign of the times, I think. Then the other story is about Hertz and just the fact that they had another awful second quarter earnings report.
Wow.
Their stock price has collapsed by 78% over the last 12 months. Most of their losses over the last year have been attributable to their virtue signaling effort to make 25% of the company's fleet electric vehicles that nobody wants to rent. And so now they're trying to sell off a big portion of them at well below market prices, and nobody wants to buy used electric vehicles. So they're not even able to do that. So the company's fallen on very hard times. And as Stu mentioned, the IRA a few minutes ago, this is why, because this is another company, just like Ford Motor Company and General Motors, that bought in whole hog to the Biden fantasy that the government was going to be able to subsidize a major EV industry in the United States into being, and you don't have to be economically viable to build them and sell them here, without the subsidies. And that's all going to collapse. It's collapsing in real time as we sit here today. We're kind of in the, I don't know, we're not even in the early stages of it anymore. Every pure play EV maker in America, except for Tesla, is either in bankruptcy or on the brink of it. And Tesla has had 3 horrible quarters in a row now, despite the introduction of its goofy Cybertruck onto the market. And so we're kind of in the mid stage of the collapse of the electric vehicle industry in the United States. And
when you have
going to be the
Kamala
last man
standing up there singing "The wheels on the bus go round and round," they put $7.3 billion and they get 60 buses. I mean,
well, and $9 billion to build 8 charging stations.
Yeah, I mean, man,
and 3 of them don't work.
Even I could do better than that. Wow.
Well, in which jurisdiction was it that pulled all their electric school buses because they found
Austin
that they were always breaking down?
Oh no,
it was
wasn't
on the
Austin.
East
That
Coast.
was
Was it
Was
Michigan?
it Pennsylvania?
Austin was a city that just canned theirs.
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, maybe.
Yeah.
I can't.
So they
remember.
got a whole bunch of subsidy money to buy these school buses. I'm not sure what the make was, because a lot of those makers gone out of business now.
Yeah.
And
Proterra.
they found that, maybe, that they would just they were constantly breaking down. The charge didn't last long enough. It put the kids at risk. Oh, big surprise. Big surprise.
All the things that people told them, warned them would happen, happened. And then they said, oh, this doesn't work, but we couldn't have possibly known this wasn't going to work.
Yeah, that's what's so infuriating.
Yeah.
How we had no idea. Everybody's telling them this is going to happen. We had no idea. Yeah. We don't listen to you.
I love Robert.
Yeah, because we're denialists. Nobody believes us. Nobody listens to us.
Robert, the only worthwhile electric cars are subways and elevators, neither of which has any batteries.
Or the old cars, that we used to have. And I mean, Houston, up until 1954, had the second biggest network of trolley cars in the United States, and dumped them all for diesel buses in the mid 50s.
Let's go here. David, I stole your Mount Etna on your Substack, which is blackmon.substack.com. It's absolutely wonderful. And I want to ask the panel a question. As we bring this up, this is Mount Etna. I'll turn the sound down because there's really no commentary or anything. But as we have an energy transition, David, do you want to tell us about that article?
Well, I mean, it just Mount Etna erupted for the first time since 2020 on Saturday. And I happened to go out and find a study that was issued in the wake of its last eruption that finds that Mount Etna has, for a volcano, in the context of volcanic eruptions, produces an unusually high CO2 content because of where the lava, the formations underground, deep underground, where the lava is boiling. And the 2020 eruption accounted for 10%, fully 10% of the global CO2 emissions from volcanoes on the face of the planet in
Wow.
2020 because of that high CO2 content. So, I mean, the point was that all the climate alarmists are going to be telling us that we're all going to die because of all this carbon dioxide. And, you know, it's just another day, folks. I mean, don't worry about it.
Hasn't anybody yet suggested that we plug volcanoes?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the
I'm
thing. Yeah,
that's an idea.
At this point.
right. Yeah, maybe we should penalize, implement a tariff on Italy for failing to plug their volcanoes.
I got an idea. Let's put all politicians in the world in volcanoes.
That's a great idea.
I think we
Or have the
can.
next meeting of the World Economic Forum inside the crater of Mount Etna.
I think
Great
that's
idea.
great.
And
That
pray
sounds
for
very
an election.
pagan, like you're giving an offering or something.
Yeah,
Well-
I'd gladly offer the WEF.
You're right.
Wasn't that
Yes,
Madagascar?
I would
Yeah,
sacrifice
yes,
every politician. Hey, Irina, this is hats off to you, and I love your slogan. Sanctions don't work as intended. I absolutely love that line. And when you
Yeah.
take a look at the satellite images show LNG at sanctioned Russian plant. This is the Novatech LNG facility. And my calculations on the number of new builds that are being built of LNG tankers. We have the dark fleet, which is an estimated 500 to 700 oil tankers that are being used by Venezuela, Russia, and Iran and all around the world in order to ship oil and gas. And I've been saying for a while that the LNG dark fleet has been rising. And the LNG fleet we are now still seeing Europe buying a lot of Russian LNG oil. And so when you sit back and take a look at this, the European sanctions set to kick in next year, intended to limit port access and transshipment for Russian LNG cargoes. It's still going to happen. I hate to tell everybody that sanctions don't work as intended, a quote, according to my dear friend Irina Slav.
Yeah, because they'll be shipping it to Turkey and they'll regasify it in Turkey. Turkey is not in the
Exactly.
European Union. And you can't make Erdogan play by your tune. They should have learned that already. It's so it's boring and it's exasperating. And yet they keep trying.
How fun.
But nobody could have seen it coming. Nobody
No,
could have
no,
possibly
no.
predicted it.
And
After they talked about this in March or April 22, or whenever the first sanctions were imposed,
Yeah.
this is not going to end well.
no, and it's part of the new energy corridor between Russia, Turkey, the Caspian Sea, and Iran. They have the new energy corridor, and it's outside of the Western or U.S. sanctions, and they're pipelining it, or they're making sure that they can't. And this is also part of the new pipelines that are going into North Korea, South Korea, and Japan from Russia. It's not being covered, and I guarantee you're going to see lots of natural gas, and the U.S. is losing Japan as an ally because energy matters.
It does that. Absolutely.
That's an amazing conclusion. Nobody could have anticipated.
I believe a great lady said, energy will always find a way. Energy and love will always find a way. Yes. I wonder who said that.
I have no idea.
Well, we're ending on a happier note than we started,
Good.
which is nice.
I put a link in there because this is kind of funny. And it's a Forbes article from 2017 where it says, here's why we can't just plug up European volcanoes.
Oh,
Imagine somebody actually having to write that to explain why we can't just do that.
Man, I got to go read that. That's a real primer.
Yeah, I'm going to read that too.
all right. So what are we going to see this next week, guys? In the UK, I'm really worried that the UK is going to erupt into social disruption. And I believe that it is with Antifa announcing that they're well armed. And as David said, this is all David's fault.
It is.
That once the Democrats believe it's going to be beneficial for them, we have the Democratic convention coming up on the 17th. I still don't believe Kamala will be their person on the ticket. I think they still can pull her off. Who
Man,
knows?
we need to do a separate podcast on how you think that's going to happen, but that's another topic. I think they're pretty much stuck with her at this point.
I think they're still going to pull something because she's ineffective. So, but that
Didn't stop them
ineffectiveness
with
is.
Joe Biden in 2020.
But I still am worried about the UK. I'm worried about Germany. The poor folks in Venezuela and the voting machines. Our hearts and prayers go out to them. We are not in a good situation. The Japan
Stock crash this morning.
stock crash is going on. So it is.
And Bulgaria has an election coming up. The government fell this morning.
Again.
Wow. What's going on there?
Nobody wants to form a coalition with anybody else, which is good because the last coalition we had, I told you about it, we had two parties that campaigned aggressively against each other only to form a coalition. And now even they have realized it would be too arrogant to do it again. So nobody's playing with anybody else. So we need a clear majority for some party.
Yeah.
Wow.
But guess how people are feeling after, 5 votes over 2 years or something? Yay, let's go vote again.
Yeah, why not? It's democracy.
Yeah, so probably our next government will be, elected by a 10th of the voting age population or something. That will be great.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
It's
Well, that's
whoever
about-
gets their base out, right?
Isn't that about how the percentage that elected Labor? You had a
But
20%.
I'm hoping that the nationalists, so-called nationalists, the patriotic parties will get more traction.
Yeah.
We'll
Well.
see.
Wow.
Oh, Joanna had a comment here last second. Stu, that is why they want her. She is ineffective but usable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Remember, they're just
She's
electing they're nominating another sock puppet, not a functional president. Just somebody that's willing to read the teleprompter for 4 years.
Wow. Great. I love Joanna.
She can read. She can't speak extemporaneously, but she
Joanna
can read.
can read.
I'm talking about the politician, not Joanna.
I'm just being a jerk. Hey,
Anyway.
let's have a great week, guys.
Before I get us in too much more trouble, we probably should close out with the Dow Jones Industrials only down 1,073 points. This is David Blackmon, Irina Slav, Tammy Nemeth, and Stu Turley saying thank you for joining us. Appreciate all the great comments. And we will talk to you again next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Have a
Stay
great week,
safe.
everyone. Bye.